A gust of wind hit the two of them when Hajin asked him about it. Soho did not dodge, as he thought. He did find a dungeon in Mount Gamak last Sunday, maybe because it was still a new dungeon and the size was still small. He thought this dungeon might be at a level that he could complete alone. Hearing that, Hajin said, even though it's small, it's still a dungeon. Raiding it alone is still difficult. Soho knows that. It must be very risky to raid it alone, but Soho then took off his jacket and said to him, whether he can trust him to guard his back is a different matter, so he must confirm his ability. Hajin was stunned for a moment hearing that. He really didn't expect this to happen. Soho said he would just do a simple test. He asked, would that be okay? But the question sounded ridiculous in Hajin's ears. Even if he decided to give in a little, it would still be difficult for him to win. The difference in their strength was too great. Hajin thought that he should avoid facing him at all costs. Hajin then stammeringly said that he was right, but it was a weakness for a sharpshooter to compete in an open area like this. And his ability was greatly affected by his weapon, so he thought it was a little unfair, but, while taking out his sword, Soho said that it didn't matter, because he wasn't testing how good his weapon was. He doesn't have to win, he'll stop when he's satisfied with the results. Hajin could only resign himself to hearing that. He said that he couldn't say anything else then. He felt that it seemed Soho was insisting on testing him. Hajin then thought very hard for the upcoming battle. As Soho inserted mana into his wooden sword, he realized that the bullets wouldn't work at all. If they faced each other head-on, not only would he lose, he would also look miserable with bruises on his face. In order to escape, he could only hope he was lucky, but Hajin suddenly thought of a plan. Soho then told him to tell him once he was ready, he would start right away. Hajin then opened the notebook that he had synchronized with his smartwatch. He said that he didn't need much preparation. Hearing that, Soho asked, then, should we start right away? Hajin said yes. Hearing that, Soho then immediately moved to attack him, right when Soho was right in front of him. Hajin then activated one of the abilities of the Master Sharpshooter talent, Bullet Time. Kim Soho's movement suddenly became very slow in his eyes at this time. Because of that, he could now see it. He could see how his wooden sword would move. When Soho's attack finally landed, Hajin then immediately moved back to dodge, but Soho's attack did not stop there. Soho then quickly returned to attack him. His attack managed to scratch Hajin's arm, which made it bleed a little. Seeing that, Hajin also admitted that he was very fast. Hajin realized that he couldn't just defend. He then took out the gun and shot at him. Soho was quite surprised by his sudden attack, but he was still able to avoid it. Taking advantage of Soho's movement delay, Hajin then immediately retreated to open up the distance. Even though he had used bullet time, but Soho was so fast that he could barely dodge his attacks. Hajin realized, the more this fight was delayed, the more difficult he would be. He needed one step, if he could lure him to take that one step. But, before Hajin could even carry out his plan, with a very fast movement, Soho was surprisingly suddenly right behind him. Seeing that, Hajin could only curse. He was really confused. Since when was he behind him? But Hajin certainly did not just give up. He then took out the ether and tied it to the tree in front of him. After that, Hajin then used the ether to pull his body towards the tree. It succeeded in making him avoid the attack thrown by Soho. Seeing that, Soho also appreciated him for being able to avoid something at this level. But, by taking a step forward, Soho then quickly arrived in front of him. Hajin's heart was really pounding at this time. Just a little more of the plan he thought of succeeding. After Soho's foot stepped on the jacket he released earlier on the ground, a surprising thing then happened. He suddenly bounced away upwards as if he had stepped on a pur. Hajin then smiled happily to see his plan succeed. After Soho finally fell to the ground, Hajin then put the gun to his head. He asked, "Are you satisfied now?" Soho was quite shocked at the moment. The reason why Soho could bounce up like that was because Hajin had fiddled with his jacket with SP. This didn't give any fatal attacks, and was unstable as it would only last for 10 minutes before disappearing. He was glad he invested his SP in this. He added bobby-trapped to Kim Soho's jacket. Once someone stepped on this jacket, the hidden power would activate and push the target with strong force. It would only last for 10 minutes and would disappear after one use. Soho was not denial and admitted his defeat. Soho was silent for a moment while looking at him, seeing Hajin who was just silent as if waiting for his answer. Soho then smiled and invited him to go together. After they both shook hands, Hajin then told him that he could count on him. that very night, in an abandoned factory in Suwon. The sound of breaking glass was then heard in one of the buildings there. It turned out to be the work of Jungyang. The members of the Chameleon troupe were gathering there. Jungyang then told Drun that he had destroyed the relic as he had asked. He asked, was it okay to destroy valuable objects like this? This was very expensive. Drun asked him not to worry. There was a way to double the price. Namely by using the items they got from England. Jungyang could only feel confused hearing that. Drun did not explain it further and said he would activate it. Drun then reflected the light emanating from the white crystal towards the relic that Jungyang had destroyed earlier. After that, a very amazing scene then occurred. The relics that had been shattered into pieces suddenly merged, and formed many swords that floated around them. Seeing that, Drun then asked for their impressions. He said that it was a copy made from the fragments. There is no need for any other process. This item can make parts of the relic just with the crystal. Based on the test results, this weapon has the ability above the low-grade relic. The relic can produce about 30 swords just from one sword, and, depending on the capacity of the crystal, they can make 6 more swords. If they sell each sword from 700 to 800 million won, then, at least they will get 5 billion won. Jungyang understands, so, what he wants to say is that this is a goose laying golden eggs, right? Jane also clapped her hands hearing that. It's amazing. She said that it was good news, but she asked them all to listen. There was one important thing. She thought the masked demon's master had started raiding Suwon's den of devils. Jane then asked the boss, masked demon's master, that's our next target. Right, the boss confirmed it. She then told them, we, the Chameleon troupe, will steal from the masked demon's master. On the way back to his dorm, Soho then thought about his fight with Hajin. Hajin's movements were all equally slow and full of gaps. He also did his best to avoid his attacks, and, that mysterious attack at the last second, he was confused. What exactly was it? He wondered, was it physical strength, or an instant mana explosion? Soho suddenly smiled at the thought. He then chuckled. He couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he thought. He also sadly thought, if someone is much stronger than average then he will attract unnecessary attention. The reason Hajin hid his strength, probably to protect himself. He thought he was the only one hiding his strength, but it turned out that there were other people who were also thinking the same thing, but his attention was then distracted when he heard the sound of swinging swords nearby, and when he headed towards the source of the sound, he then saw Nayun practicing with her sword. Soho then approached her and asked, what are you doing? Nayun was very surprised when suddenly someone appeared behind her. Soho asked, was she practicing swords? Hearing that, Nayun embarrassedly said that she was just practicing her stamina. She also asked him, what was he doing outside this late? Hearing that, Soho suddenly got an idea. He then said that he had just met Hajin. Nayun was then surprised to hear that. She asked, what business did you two have with each other? Soho said that they were talking about her. Nayun then blushed hearing that. She then embarrassedly scolded him. Soho apologized. He said that he was just joking. They sparred briefly earlier. Nayun was then confused to hear that. Wasn't Hajin too weak to spar with him? What was the need for him to compete with him? Hearing that, Soho asked her to consider it a secret between him and Hajin. Nayun could only frown at that. Nayun then irritably told him to do whatever he wanted. She would finish her training. Who cares what time he came in? Hearing that, Soho then gave her a suggestion. How about flexing the hand she used to hold her sword? Soho then demonstrated it and said, if she held it that stiffly, she won't be able to cut the things she should be able to cut. Nayun was really amazed to see that. She then told him to show her again. Soho then demonstrated it again. He said that she should relax her grip for starters. Hearing that, Nayun then did as he said. After the grueling training, Nayun went back to her dormitory. She was still thinking about her training with Soho. Soho at that time asked if it was okay for her. Should he help her practice? It felt like if she did things a little differently then she could understand it a little better. But no matter how hard she thought, she still couldn't find the answer. It was very frustrating for her. The only way she could get rid of her stress this late was to play games. There was a device that looked like a helmet on the table in her room. This was a device that many heroes used to do image training, a gaming device used to log into the virtual game. She only needed to wear the helmet on her head, a virtual game that is famous all over the world, Gladiator of the Century, a league that opens every season is broadcast. The game is so popular that even the media is interested in the winner. The thing that makes Gladiator of the Century special is that, different from the usual game, there are no stats or items in this game. It means that one can only try to win by relying on fighting instincts and control over their body. The nickname that Chai Nayun uses in this game is Neunjijangmen. She has a record of 98 wins and 17 losses. She is very proud of these results. But, her goal today is to relieve her stress, so she will ignore her ranking. She needs to find someone to fight with immediately, but her prayers were soon answered. Because she then found someone right after that, that person had a name, Extra 7, with a record of 43 wins and 43 defeats. His rank was Platinum. Seeing that, Nayun felt that he was an easy opponent. He would be her prey today. She then sent a duel request to him. Shortly after that, Extra 7 then agreed to her duel request. After that, they were then given 3 seconds to get ready. While setting up a fighting stance, Nayun knew that the basis of a fight was to read the enemy's movements. She decided to see first how her opponent would attack. Just as the countdown was about to reach 0, her opponent suddenly quickly moved to attack her, and just as their duel began, their attacks then clashed. Nayun was quite surprised by the movements made by her opponent. She did not expect he would suddenly advance once the duel began. But what made her more surprised was, her opponent suddenly grabbed her by the collar, then tackled her leg, which made her lose her balance. Not wasting the opportunity, her opponent then immediately slashed towards her. She was then declared defeated after her character in the game died. Nayun was really angry at this time. She was very upset with the sneaky tactics used by her opponent earlier. She then sent another duel request to him. Nayun didn't want to accept that she lost, so she invited him to compete one more round. Extra 7 accepted that, but the next story was no different. She again lost to him. But Nayun didn't just give up. She still couldn't accept it. She then challenged him one more time, but the ending was no different. She could still be easily defeated by him. When Nayun continued to challenge him again, the ending was always the same. She could be easily defeated by him. She could only curse, although this fact was difficult for her to accept. But she realized that she could not win against him. And when Nayun wanted to once again challenge him to a duel, Extra 7 then said that he had to sleep. He then said goodbye to her, seeing him about to log out. Nayun then asked him to wait for a while. She asked, does he always log in around this time? Extra 7 replied yes. Then, Nayun asked, can he fight with her every time they meet? Extra 7 was silent for a moment. He then accepted her request. After saying goodbye to her, he then logged out of the game. After returning to the real world, he then opened his helmet. He was confused by who challenged him earlier. She was very insistent. The Extra 7 identity turned out to be Kim Hajin. He had won 7 times in a row from Chai Nayun in the game earlier. The reason why he played the game was because he just wanted to see if this talent also worked in the game, and unexpectedly it turned out to be successful. He got an additional 37% buff by using the helmet when logging into the game. That was the reason why he could become so strong earlier. The function of random enhancement was much better than he expected, although he was a little worried when the mana started to run out. The concept of this was really an enhancement. With this trait, his gaming device was at a level much different from others. In the game, he could feel all his senses being enhanced, but he regretted that the enhancement range was only 1 to 44%. But fortunately his stat luck was quite high, but he was then surprised when he saw Evangel, who finished some of the cake very quickly. Hajin then immediately took the cake and asked, how can you eat that much so quickly? He asked her not to eat anymore. Later she got a stomachache. Hearing that, Evangel then sadly asked, why? She wanted to eat more, but Hajin didn't allow it. He told her that she could eat it again tomorrow, but Evangel certainly didn't accept that. She then tried to take the cake back from him. Seeing that, Hajin then put the cake in a high place that could not be reached by her. He was completely helpless. She started to whine, asking for sweets now. Hajin then comforted the crying Evangel. He said that he promised to buy her better food tomorrow morning. Hearing that, Evangel asked, really? Hajin replied, of course. Had he broken his promise before? So, he then asked her to sleep now. Evangel understood, even though it was late at night, but Hajin did not go to bed immediately. After successfully calming Evangel and telling her to sleep, he then opened his smartwatch. But he was then surprised when someone sent him a message. The message was from Kim Suho. He invited him to meet on the second Friday of August. Hajin smiled reading that. He knew it was the day when they would head to Mount Gamak. He was happy that it was going according to his plan. Hajin then sent him a message that he understood. He invited him to meet in an empty area. Now, the only thing left was to finish the dungeon. So, for the next few days, every day his activities were only practicing and studying, and when night fell, he then logged into the Gladiator of the Century game, and again fought with Chai Nayun, although the two of them had fought many times, but still Hajin was always the winner. Nayun then confusedly asked him, "How did you do that consecutively?" Hajin just said that she just needed to calm down while doing it, but Nayun certainly wouldn't believe such an excuse. She didn't believe that it was that easy. Besides that, she was also confused, why his win rate was only 50% if he played the game this well. Hearing that, Hajin was confused about how to answer. He then just said that it was because he didn't like to connect victory in defeat with rank. Hajin certainly lied about that. The real reason was because he lost because of random stats, but Nayun believed his words just like that. She even thought he was cool. She couldn't sleep when she lost the ranked battle that time. Hajin then invited her to stop now. It was time for him to rest. Nayun understood. She then said goodbye to him. Hearing that, Hajin helplessly thought. She acted as if they promised to meet tomorrow, but when he saw Nayun's cheerful look, Hajin then smiled and decided to meet her again tomorrow in the game. After logging out of the game, Hajin helplessly thought, it seems that this has become his daily activity. His impression of Nayun during his interaction in the game is, actually she is quite polite. He thought it was strange when she suddenly asked him to duel, but he still didn't know how to read her nickname. It was very long and complicated. So he decided to call her Hey for now, but when he tried to remember her nickname, the word Nayun suddenly came to his mind. He then quickly pushed the thought out of his head. He felt that it didn't make sense. Based on the way she spoke and her temperament, Hajin was sure she must be a guy. While Nayun herself was now practicing using her sword in a quiet place in the cube, her practice was supervised by Kim Suho. Nayun then asked him, did he think she had improved a lot? Suho answered yes. Her movements are much more flexible now. Nayun was happy to hear that. She said that she often played games lately, and she felt that the game was quite helpful to her. Suho was then confused to hear that. He then asked, did she mean Gladiator of the Century? Nayun confirmed it. She asked, did he play too? Suho said no, but he heard people say the game was quite helpful. Nayun said that not only the game, but she also met a very skilled person there. Suho was quite surprised to hear that. Nayun said that he was skilled and his personality was good. She often practiced with him, because you have to try to win in ranked battles. Everyone plays defensively. That's why matches start to become boring, but that person was different. He always went forward to attack, fast attacks like a raging storm. Every step he took made his opponent afraid. It really helped her get used to close combat. Hearing that, Suho felt that he was really good. If she thought so, he sounded like an active hero, right? Nayun replied no. She had already asked him, but, before Nayun could finish his sentence, someone suddenly called Suho behind them. The person had been looking for him. While blushing, Nayun then looked back. It turned out to be Hajin. When Hajin approached them, he also saw Nayun. He then asked, what were you talking about? And when Suho was about to tell about Nayun practicing with someone in the game, Nayun then immediately said that she just accidentally met someone while practicing. Hearing that, Hajin then asked, really? Suho then was confused when Nayun suddenly looked at him sharply. Then, Hajin then invited Suho to leave now. Suho understood. He then said goodbye to Nayun. Nayun then was surprised to hear that. She then confusedly asked, where are you two going? Suho only said that they were planning something. He asked her not to force herself, and encouraged her in her training. She then also said goodbye to them. Hajin was silent for a moment. He then also encouraged her in her training. Nayun was stunned for a moment to hear that. She then thanked him, but she felt confused. Seeing the closeness of the two of them, she was confused. Since when did the two of them become close? She thought Suho was just joking when he said they were talking about her. A conjecture then appeared in Chai Nayun's mind. Maybe they were close because of her, but when she recalled Hajin, who didn't want to be her friend, she felt that conjecture was impossible. How could that happen when he said he didn't want to be friends with her? Nayun thought that she just needed to ignore them, but, for some reason, it was very difficult for her. She then secretly continued to follow them, and tried to eavesdrop on their conversation. She actually felt embarrassed to do something like this. But she then heard Hajin, who suddenly asked Suho how she was doing. Her mind went blank for a moment when she heard that. She then blushed and wondered, what did he just say? When dinner time arrived, the two of them then stopped by a place called Grandma's Rice Soup. The place was open until 24 hours, they discussed about the dungeon there. While they were eating their dishes, Hajin then asked him, "You said the dungeon was around Suwon, right?" Soho confirmed it, "So they have to be careful." Hajin pondered for a moment hearing that. Suwon is the most dangerous place in the metropolitan area. That's because when the outcall is active, the area undergoes drastic changes. And more than half of the area becomes dangerous to explore. Thus, ordinary people were forbidden to enter the western area of Suwon. The Gamak Mountains were right around its border. The Gamak Mountains, although he was the one who designed this world, there were many hidden pieces that were not found. Among those hidden pieces, there were some that he could not get alone, but if left alone, some of them would fall into the hands of the main villains in this story. However, this would be different if he went with Kim Soho, whose skills were above hero intermediate grade. They might be able to find those hidden pieces faster than the villains. Soho was then confused when he saw Hajin suddenly looking at him strangely. Hajin then gave him a tissue and said that his face was smudged. Soho thanked him. "If you look at it from this side, he suddenly looks cute." Kim Soho is probably poor, so he will take care of the equipment and food supplies. There were more things to prepare than he imagined. Right at that moment, a person with a completely covered appearance then entered the restaurant. Hajin was then confused when he saw someone with such a suspicious appearance, and what made him more confused was when the person suddenly startled when she saw him. After arriving at the reception desk, the person then said that she was talking to her through a call. The receptionist understood. She then asked her to wait for a while. When Hajin looked more carefully at the person's face, he seemed to recognize who the person was. He then grinned slyly, and ignorantly said, "Who do we have here? Isn't that you, Yona?" Yona immediately broke out in a cold sweat when she heard that. Yona loved commoners' food, but Yona was still evasive at the moment. She then pretended not to understand, asking, "Who do you mean?" Hearing the voice, Soho was then sure that it was really Yona. He asked, "She is Yona, right? Yona's favorite food is hamburger." Hajin then chuckled and said, since she was here, he then invited her to eat together, but Yona still did not want to admit herself at this time. She said that he was wrong, but Soho, who was sure that he then invited her to join them, they also just arrived, and when they once again invited her to eat together, Yona then said, "I'm not her." Yona once again said that I'm not her. Besides hamburgers, her favorite food was rice soup. Yona looked very embarrassed at this time. When her order was ready, she then immediately took it, and immediately left from there. She also said that she didn't know who that is. Seeing her running away, the receptionist then immediately shouted that she had not paid. They could only be stunned at the scene. Hajin then told the receptionist that he would pay for it. After that incident, Yona always avoided him for 3 whole days. Hajin was really confused by it. Isn't being like that more embarrassing than liking ordinary people's food? And finally, Friday arrived. Hajin had arrived at Suwon Station. While looking around, Hajin felt Soho was around, and sure enough, he then heard Soho's voice calling him nearby. After approaching him, Hajin then asked, "Where are we going?" Soho did not answer and only told him to follow him. When they arrived at the Gamak Mountains, they then continued to climb to the top of the mountain. After not yet arrived, Hajin then wondered, how long had they climbed? The Gamak Mountains was a dangerous place because this area was on the border of the Forbidden Zone. He had to watch the surroundings carefully until they arrived at the dungeon. After walking for who knows how long, Soho then said that they had arrived. While pointing to a small tunnel in front of him, Soho said that this was the place. While looking into the small tunnel, Hajin said that this place was indeed a difficult place to find even if one knew of its existence. No wonder no one found it. Hearing that, Soho said, "That's right," and, as he could see, the entrance was quite narrow. Once they were inside, it would be difficult for them to escape. He then asked him, was he okay with that? Hearing that, Hajin smiled slightly. He then confidently replied, "Of course." While showing his desert eagle, Hajin said that this thing was quite strong. Just in case something happened, he had used SP to make some light bullets. But since the boss monster is a high intermediate grade, the light bullets can only buy a little time. Even so, he is not worried. He can leave the rest to Soho, so he feels that this should be enough. Hajin then asked, "Then, should we go in?" Hajin then extended his hand towards him, and invited him to hold hands. Soho was then confused by that. He then asked, "Why do they have to hold hands?" Hajin asked him back. "It's dark inside, right?" He told him to hold his hand and follow him, if they just use a flashlight, they might attract aggro spirit monsters. Soho finally realized that. He then agreed to his plan and invited him to enter. While holding hands, they then walked carefully in the dark cave. While looking around the cave, Soho said that this place was spacious compared to the narrow entrance. It was quite difficult to see the road ahead because of the lack of lighting. He also felt that it was quite creepy in here. Hajin agreed with him, but he was then surprised when he saw something in front of him. He then told Soho to wait here for a while. As he looked ahead, relying on the sharpness of his eyes, he was then surprised when he saw a passage there. They entered from the east, but there was an entrance on the other side, but he realized that it was not the setting of this place. He then activated the 1,000-mile eyes to see it more clearly. In the hallway, there were silhouettes of a group of people who seemed to be heading there. Hajin was then surprised to see that, relying on the mapping of the 1,000-mile eyes ability, Hajin realized that there were people coming from there.